They moved into my house on a Saturday morning in April, 2 weeks after my wife's funeral. By the following spring, my son-in-law had started calling it his. I want to be clear about something before I tell you what happened. I am not a man who asks for much. I spent 41 years as an electrician in Columbus, Ohio. I woke up at 5 in the morning, drove a truck with a cracked dashboard for 2 decades, and ate packed lunches on job sites in January so I could put my daughter through college without her owing a single dollar in loans. I am not a man who complains. I am not a man who raises his voice. But I am also not a man who forgets. My wife, Helen, died on a Thursday in March. Pancreatic cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. I held her hand in that hospital room until the machines went quiet, and then I drove myself home and sat in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the coffee mug she always left by the sink and could never remember to put away. I didn't cry that night. I just sat there and thought about how a house can be completely full of someone even after they're gone. My daughter called from Denver the morning after the funeral. She said she and her husband were worried about me. She said it wasn't right for me to be alone in that big house. She said they'd been talking, and they thought the best thing, the most practical thing, was for them to come stay with me for a while, help me get back on my feet. She said it like she was doing me a favor. I said that was kind of her. I said I appreciated it. I meant both of those things. My daughter is 34 years old. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh, and I have come to understand very little of her mother's judgment when it comes to the man she married. My son-in-law is the kind of man who enters a room and immediately starts rearranging the furniture in his head. Not because anything is wrong with where it is, just because he can't stand the idea that things existed before he got there. He drove his truck into my driveway on that Saturday morning, and the first thing he said to me, before he even shook my hand, was that I had a cracked gutter on the north side of the roof that was going to cause water damage if I didn't address it. He said it like he'd already been appointed the manager of my property, like he was reporting a problem to himself. I thanked him. I should have said something else. I know that now. The first month was tolerable. My daughter cooked sometimes, and there was noise in the house again, and some nights I was grateful for that. Helen and I had rattled around in this house for the last 6 years, since my daughter left for college, and then for Denver, and the quiet after her death had become a different kind of quiet, heavier, without the possibility of anyone coming home. But I noticed things. I noticed that my son-in-law started parking in the center of the garage instead of on the side, so my truck ended up in the driveway. I noticed that he rearranged the remotes on the coffee table and then told me where they were, as if I had forgotten the layout of my own living room. I noticed that when I came downstairs in the morning, he was already in the kitchen making decisions what went in the refrigerator, what got thrown out, which burner got used for which pot. Small things. I told myself they were small things. My daughter worked remotely, and my son-in-law had what he called a consulting business that I never fully understood. He took calls in my office, the room where I had my filing cabinet, my old drafting table, the photograph of Helen and me on our honeymoon in Savannah. He closed the door when he was on those calls. After a few weeks, he had moved a second monitor in there and pushed my drafting table against the wall. I said nothing. I want to explain something about why I said nothing, because I know some of you will wonder. I said nothing because my daughter looked happier than she had in years. She was laughing in the mornings. She was cooking dinner and setting the table and calling me from the other room to come watch things on television. I had spent 14 months watching my wife disappear, and before that 6 years watching my daughter visit less and less, and I was so hungry for a house that felt alive again that I was willing to eat a few inconveniences to keep it. That was my mistake. Not weakness, not passivity, hunger. I wanted my family back, and I was willing to pretend not to notice certain things in order to have it. My son-in-law figured that out. I think he figured it out faster than I did. By the summer, he had started referring to the house in ways that bothered me in the back of my head. The way a loose wire bothers you, not enough to trip the breaker, just enough to hum. He would say things like, "We've been thinking about updating the driveway," or "We want to redo the back porch before winter." We, as if the house belonged to all 3 of us equally. As if the 37 years Helen and I had spent painting walls and replacing floors and planting the oak tree in the backyard together was just context, and he had arrived to take the project from here. I let it go the first several times. Then, in August, I came home from my Thursday card game with my friend Gerald to find my workshop reorganized. I have a workshop in the basement. It is where I keep my tools. My father's old toolbox. The workbench I built myself from reclaimed oak in 1994. Helen used to say that workshop was the room that told you everything you needed to know about who I was. My son-in-law had moved 2 of my tool cabinets to make room for a home gym setup. He'd purchased a rack, a bench, rubber floor mats. He'd stacked several of my storage bins in the corner without asking what was in them. One of those bins had Helen's Christmas ornaments. I stood at the bottom of those basement stairs for a long time that evening. I went upstairs. My son-in-law was watching television. I told him, in a very even voice, that the workshop was mine and that I expected him to ask before he moved anything in it. He looked at me like I'd interrupted something important, nodded once, and said, "Sure, Ray. Didn't think it was a big deal." My daughter came in from the kitchen. She heard the last part. She looked between us and said, "Dad, he was just trying to create some space." He asked me first. He asked her first. In my own house. I went to bed that night and stared at the ceiling and had a conversation with Helen in my head that I've been having since March. I told her what was happening. I could hear exactly what she would have said. She would have said, "Raymond, stop being so patient. Patient is just another word for letting people mistake you for furniture." I kept being patient. By October, my son-in-law had started having opinions about my finances. Not directly, he was smarter than that. He would mention articles he'd read about estate planning. He would ask, casually, if I had a financial advisor. He made a comment once, over dinner, about how complicated it was for families when older parents didn't have their affairs consolidated. My daughter nodded along. I ate my food and said I'd been managing my own finances since before he was born, and nobody said anything after that. But the conversations didn't stop. They just moved out of earshot. I am a light sleeper. Helen used to say I could hear a leaf thinking about falling off a tree. One night in November, I woke up at 2 in the morning and heard voices in the kitchen. I did not get up. I lay in bed and listened through the floor, the way the house carries sound when it's cold outside and everything is still. I heard my son-in-law say my name. I heard him say the word, capacity. I heard him say the phrase, while he's still cooperative. I heard my daughter say something I couldn't make out, and then I heard him say, clearly, that the house was worth more than I understood, and that the longer they waited, the more complicated it would get. I lay in that bed, in the dark, in the house I had bought at 31 years old with Helen's hand in mine at the closing table, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot, and what I felt was cold, clear, like a circuit that has been quietly overloaded for a long time and finally knows exactly where the fault is. I did not go downstairs. I did not confront them that night or the next morning or the morning after that. I let them eat breakfast in my kitchen and make their plans in my office and rearrange the furniture in their heads. I let them think that what they saw, a quiet, grieving old man eating cereal at a kitchen table, was all there was to me. I called my attorney on a Tuesday afternoon. His name is William, and he has been handling my legal affairs for 22 years. I drove to his office myself, parked my truck in the lot, walked in and sat down and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is what I've always liked about William. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a moment and said, "Raymond, how long have you been sitting on this?" I said, "Long enough." He said, "What do you want to do?" I told him exactly what I wanted to do. William updated my will the same week. My daughter remained in it, as she always had. My son-in-law did not. He was not in it before, but there had been a provision, a generous one, that Helen and I had included that would have extended to a spouse. That provision was removed. I also spoke with William about my deed, my bank accounts, and a power of attorney document that I had only recently realized I had never actually established with anyone. We corrected that. We established it with Gerald, my friend of 30 years, who met me for coffee that Wednesday and agreed to the responsibility without asking me a single question about whether he thought it was necessary. Then I came home and made dinner. My son-in-law came in from the garage at 6 o'clock and said something about the house needing a new water heater before winter. He said we should probably budget for that. He poured himself a glass of water from my refrigerator and leaned against my counter like a man who had been leaning against that counter his whole life. I said, "I'll take care of it." He said, "Ray, at some point it might make more sense for us to." I said, "I'll take care of it." He looked at me, and something moved across his face, a small recalibration, a flicker of something he quickly put away. He nodded and took his water into the living room. My daughter came downstairs for dinner. She asked how my day was. I said it was good. I passed her the bread. We ate together at the table where Helen and I had eaten 10,000 meals. And I looked at my daughter, her mother's eyes, her mother's laugh, and I felt something complicated and sad and clear all at the same time. I loved her. That part was never in question. But love without limits is not kindness. Helen taught me that. Actually, she used to say that the most loving thing you could sometimes do for someone was refuse to participate in their mistakes. She was talking about my daughter at the time. Actually, different context, same principle. The eviction notice was served on a Friday morning in December. William had prepared a formal 30-day notice to vacate, citing the specific terms under which they had entered the property as temporary guests. With no lease, no tenancy agreement, and no legal claim to residency, he served it through a process server, which meant it came to the door officially, in an envelope. While I was sitting in the kitchen with my coffee, I heard my son-in-law's voice first, loud, confused, then angry, then loud again. I did not go to the door. My daughter came into the kitchen. She was holding the papers and her face was doing several things at once. She said, "Dad, what is this?" I said, "It's what it says it is." She said, You're evicting us?" I said, "I'm asking you to make other arrangements. You have 30 days. That's more than enough time." She sat down across from me. She looked like she was trying to figure out who I was, which told me she hadn't been paying close attention. She said, "Dad, we moved here to help you. We gave up our place in Denver." I said, "You gave up a rental lease to move into a mortgage-free house that you intended to eventually control. I know that. I should have said something sooner. I didn't, and that's on me." She was quiet for a moment. I said, "I love you. I want a relationship with you, but not under the same roof as a man who stands in my kitchen at 2 in the morning discussing my capacity and my property like I'm a problem he's solving." She opened her mouth and closed it. My son-in-law appeared in the doorway then. He was holding the papers and he was not quiet and he was not composed. He told me I had made a serious mistake. He told me I was confused and grieving and acting irrationally. He used the word capacity again, which I thought was interesting, given what I had overheard. He said he was going to talk to his own attorney. I said, "That's your right." He said, "You really think you can do this?" I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at him the way I used to look at a circuit diagram when I was trying to understand where the problem started. Clear, patient, thorough. I said, "Son, I've been doing things long before you arrived and I'll be doing them long after you leave. You have 30 days. I'd suggest you use them well." He left the kitchen. My daughter sat there a little longer. She cried some, and I didn't pretend that didn't cost me something, because it did. But I had learned from 14 months of watching Helen that there are things worth paying the cost of, and there are things that only feel expensive because you've been putting them off. She reached across the table and touched my hand. I held it. She said, "I didn't know it had gotten this far." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have paid more attention." I said, "Yes." She looked up at me and something in her face shifted, something younger, something that looked like the girl who used to sit at this same table and tell me about her day at school while Helen made dinner behind us. She said, "Are we going to be okay?" I said, "If you want us to be, yes." They were gone in 3 weeks. My son-in-law left without saying goodbye to me, which was fine. My daughter hugged me in the driveway for a long time, and when she pulled back, her eyes were red and mine weren't, and I think that surprised her. She called me from Denver 2 weeks later. We talked for 40 minutes. It was the best conversation we'd had in years. Maybe because there was finally nothing between us, no arrangement, no pretense, no man in the background recalculating the square footage of someone else's life. I went back down to my workshop the day after they left. I moved the gym equipment to the garage, which is where my son-in-law should have put it from the start if he'd bothered to ask. I unpacked the bin that had been moved to the corner, the one with Helen's Christmas ornaments. I unwrapped each one: the glass cardinal, the little wooden sled we bought in Vermont in 1989, the lopsided star my daughter had made in 3rd grade from pipe cleaners and glue, and set them on the workbench one by one. I put up the Christmas tree that year by myself. It was the first time I'd done it without Helen. I thought it would feel diminished, quieter. It did feel quieter, but not diminished. There's a difference, I've learned, between quiet that comes from emptiness and quiet that comes from clarity. My house was full of the second kind that December, the quiet of a man who knows exactly where everything is, who it belongs to, and what it means. I stood in my living room with the tree lit and a cup of coffee, and I thought about something Helen used to say when she was gardening. She had a row of rose bushes along the back fence that she tended every year, and she was ruthless about it, more ruthless than you'd expect from a woman that gentle. She cut them back hard every fall, more than seemed right, more than I always thought was necessary. I used to stand at the window watching her and think she was being too severe. Every spring, those roses came back bigger and more alive than the year before. She told me once that the roses didn't suffer from the pruning. The roses required it. That what looked like loss was actually the plant being returned to itself. All the dead growth removed. All the energy redirected toward what was actually supposed to be there. I understood it intellectually when she said it. I understand it in my bones now. My house is mine. My workshop is mine. The coffee mug is still by the sink, because I leave it there on purpose now, not from forgetfulness but from choice. Some things you keep because they were someone else's, and keeping them is how you keep the person. Some things you let go of because they were never yours to hold. My son-in-law thought I was a man in decline. He saw a widower at a kitchen table eating cereal and thought he was looking at an ending. He wasn't paying attention. The quietest men are sometimes just the ones who have learned not to broadcast their intentions. We don't need to. We have time. We have deeds. We have attorneys named William, who pick up the phone on the second ring. And we have 30 years of knowing exactly which wires to touch and which ones to leave alone. If you have found yourself in something like this, if there is someone in your life who has been slowly rearranging your furniture, in the literal or the figurative sense, I want you to hear me clearly. Document everything. Call someone you trust. Know your legal rights regarding your own property, because they are extensive and they are yours. Do not let shame or love or loneliness convince you to stay silent past the point where silence stops being grace and starts being surrender. You are not too old. You are not too tired. You are not obligated to be anyone's stepping stone, just because you happen to be the quietest person in the room. The quietest person in the room is often just the one who has already decided what they're going to do.